This is Velma, lighting up the room like a shining star and making every single bad thought soar away to another time and place. Smoke from the forgotten food sends shrills from the smoke detector, but our laughter drowns out its horrified and monotone beep. The cold November air creeps in through the cracks between the unfinished window frame, pulling us even closer to the crackling fire. I watch the logs as they slowly lick the bricks lining the top of the small fireplace, the sound of the fire alarm slowly bringing us back to reality. Mom gets the burnt food out of the oven, and Dad prepares more food to replace the horrors of what just came out. Velma starts rolling out the dough for new rolls. When her hands are completely full of flour, dough, and a dash of love, she bends down, cups my face, and kisses my nose. Velma is my great-grandma. She's a short woman, 5 feet and 7 inches tall. She has very short and curly platinum hair. She has a rabbit's nose and rosy red cheeks. Her lips are always a deep red from her lipstick. Her teeth are 2 rows of pearly whites. Her teeth were perfectly straight and not a single tooth missing. I never knew quite how old Velma really was. She was a little older than 80, yet she always said, "I'm only 21, darling," whenever I asked how old she was. She never told me or anyone how old she really was. It was always 21, no matter who asked. Even though she was older, she never dressed like it, though. She always wore dress slacks and a flowing blouse. She always wore some kind of dress shoes and had straight black socks. She went to church quite frequently, and she always dressed as if she was going right after we left. Velma was a stay-at-home mom growing up. She did neighborhood sewing for a little extra money, but never had a full-time job. Her husband was in the war and sent every penny he got back home to pay the bills. She lived with very little, so her 2 sons and her 1 daughter got what they wanted. She grew up in the Great Depression and lived without so much that it didn't bother her to live without, so her children grew up with a full life. My grandpa had told me the most expensive thing she had bought herself was an old 35mm film camera, so she could take pictures of me, my brother, and my sister growing up. She had an entire hallway filled with pictures from when she was a child, from pictures when she was a child to me as a child and everyone in between. She only had 2 pictures of herself on the wall. The first one was of her mother holding her in her arms while she was 3 months old. The last picture she had of her was a picture of her 7-year-old self in her church bests. Every picture on that wall had a handmade frame carved by great-grandpa. Each frame had a different design carefully carved into the wood. Some had simple curves and circles, but other had little houses and trees carved into them. Velma believed deeply in the Bible and knew in her heart without a doubt she was going to heaven. She prayed every night before she went to sleep and prayed every morning thanking God that he let her live through the night. She had Bibles all over the house and lived her life by the word of God. She never said a cuss word, never raised her voice, and she always showed herself as a cheerful woman. Even if she was having a bad day, she would never lash out at anyone. Her mood brought happiness to everyone in the room. You couldn't have a bad day around her. Velma's smile was something that you couldn't forget. Once you saw it, it burned the image of those pearly whites deep into your head. I can still see that smile, the way it sparkled like the corny toothpaste commercials. It reminds me of one of my earliest memories of her. It's also my favorite. We were sitting around the kitchen table. I was no older than 6 years old, and I loved every second I could be with her. I was sitting in a booster seat, so we were about the same height. We had a cream soda and a glass bottle sitting in between us with 2 straws poking out of the bottle. We just talked for hours that day. She had told me stories from my childhood, and I would tell her stories of what I had done recently. When the cream soda was about half full, Velma started blowing into the straw and making bubbles in the soda. I thought that was the coolest thing I've ever seen, so I joined in. We kept blowing in our straws and bubbles started overflowing. They rolled onto the table and popped once they hit the tabletop. After a couple of seconds, we both had to stop because we were laughing so hard. We just kept laughing and laughing. Every time one of us would stop, we'd look at the other one and break into even more laughter. We continued to laugh until both of our sides hurt and we were gasping for breath. After a couple minutes of gasping to breath, it went back to normal. That was my greatest memory of Velma. My mom loved Velma. It was her only grandmother she had, and Velma spoiled her to death. Velma bought her anything she wanted, whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted it. When my mom was 15, she stayed the night at Velma's house. Instead of going to sleep, they stayed up all night making sweets. They made sweets like cookies, brownies, pies, muffins, and cakes. They made a huge mess in the kitchen. They had flour everywhere, and they had dough on every surface, and used every pot and pan, cookie tray in the entire house. My mom said that really late into that night, she was making cookies and decided to throw a cookie ball at Velma, and it sparked an all-out food fight. Our mom had said, it was like someone set off a smoke bomb in the kitchen. There was so much flour in the air that she lost sight of Velma in the smoke screen. They didn't bother to clean the whole mess up. They cleaned most of it up during the night, but left some of it for the next morning. They ended up filling up the dining table with random sweets, and they had to start putting food on the chairs. That is my mom's favorite memory of Velma. I miss my old friend. I miss the memories that I did make and the ones I couldn't make. I miss the smile that would light up the entire room. I miss the way we would laugh at things that weren't funny to other people, but somehow funny to us. I know she would have loved to see me all dressed up for the dances. I know she would have loved to have me drive around the city and just talk like we used to. I know she would have taught me how to cook like she could have. Now that once perfect smile is forever frowning, taken so suddenly by a stroke. Velma looked healthy as a horse one day. Next day, it's a stage 3 stroke that kills that smile. Her house, once a safe haven that wouldn't let the worst of depression through its front door, was swallowed by the one thing it kept out for so long. The house with bright yellow walls went 10 shades darker overnight. The bright white carpet that once comforted my tired body seemed too bright now. The funeral that followed was the worst. It started out in a tiny white church Velma went to almost every day. The casket was open, and we were allowed to say our last goodbyes. I never wanted to say goodbye, though. I couldn't bring myself to tell her goodbye. I just stood above her on the steps that they provided for the kids. I cried and cried. I kept holding her cold, cold hand. I got ushered away by my parents after a couple of minutes. We had to wait for everyone else to come say goodbye. Then, after all the tears covered her last blouse, they closed the casket. The priest, in between fits of snobs and sniffles, said what he had to say. Those who stayed the whole time followed us to the cemetery. We did more prayers around her before they lowered her into the ground, and after a long set of prayers, they slowly lowered her into the ground. Each and every person that stayed grabbed a handful of dirt and said their last goodbyes to Velma. The dirt blanketed the top of their coffin. I couldn't speak, so I just cried when I dropped my handful of dirt. I hope you get to read this, Velma. I hope you're okay with me using you for the paper. I hope you can remember all of those stories. I know I sure can. I still blow into my drinks like we used to, but it's not funny anymore. I lost my best friend, and nobody can replace you. I have been to your house a couple of times since you left, but it's not the same as it used to be. Grandpa took down all the pictures on the wall and he sold most of your furniture. I just wish you were still here. I hope I'll be able to see you again.